This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I am Boyd Matheson. Each Sunday we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people making a difference. We talk politics so we can discuss society, and we explore society so we can discuss the principles and the people in America who actually live them. We bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Well, the horrific events of the brutal Hamas attack of October 7th are seared into our collective memory. Innocent concert and festival goers brutally gunned down by terrorists, others raped, beaten, and taken hostage. In the midst of such moments, heroes often arise, running toward danger without question or pause, sometimes giving the last full measure of devotion, laying down their life for the life of a friend. Others saving the freedom of many while giving up their own. Ori Danino is just such a hero, currently being held hostage in Gaza by Hamas. Ori's mother will be coming to Park City, Utah on July 17th for a special evening of reflection and solidarity and community. It's a time for both getting comfortable with uncomfortable conversations and not getting comfortable with those base, emotion-driven conversations filled with anger, rage, and contempt. Coming together and connecting is always the beginning of understanding and the first steps on the road to better days. I am grateful today to be joined by someone who helps so many of us travel that road to better days on a wide range of issues. Avremi Zippel is Utah's homegrown rabbi. He is a survivor of abuse. He's an advocate and voice for the voiceless, the weak, and the weary, and a treasured and trusted leader and influence to so many of us in our community. Rabbi Zippel, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, and thank you for having me, Boyd. Good to be here.
So as we start by just looking at, obviously, the hostages being held by Hamas inside of Gaza, we all have to acknowledge that is not right and not acceptable for anybody under any circumstance.
Coming up on 275 days, I remember a time when it was collectively agreeable for everyone to unite and believe that the hostages should be released and sent home to their families. And it's remarkable to believe that this past week we passed the 9-month threshold that some of these folks are in Gaza. At this point, we know that in many instances it's bodies of hostages that are being kept in Gaza, of folks that have been confirmed dead. And we are privileged as a community to meet a hero, much like you were discussing, the mom of Ori Danino, Mrs. Danino, who will be coming to share a story of hope, a story of belief, a story of, I'd say, undying belief, and really counting the days, every single day, believing that this will be the day of the miracle. And it's a story that when I think about hearing that from that sort of person gives me the chills personally, and I think it's a remarkable opportunity for our community.
It is a remarkable opportunity, and her story is one that is so fascinating. You shared just a snippet with me in terms of how she approached all of this, in terms of going back to where Ori's car was. Just to walk us through a little bit of that.
So I know that a lot of people, specifically here in Utah, have gone to see the death camps in Auschwitz, and a lot of people speak about the shoes. You see the shoes in the death camps, just the piles and piles of shoes. I think in today's day and age, and specifically at Nova, at the music festival, people talk about the cars. There's just an endless parade of cars of folks that were trying to get away. Some did, some cars were shot, they got away on foot. Ori Danino left Nova, took folks to safety, got a call on his cell phone from folks he had met hours before that they were still stuck behind, and drove back to pick them up. I'm going to assume that at some level, knowing he might never return from that, but he made that journey, and his car was shot up when at Nova and he was taken hostage, and his mom actually asked to be taken back to Nova to see his car, bullet-ridden, hard to make it out as a car, and she's taken there by security forces and social workers and the whole gamut of humanity. And when she sees this car, she recites a psalm of thanksgiving and praise to the Almighty, grateful that he did not burn to death in the car. Now, granted, if he didn't burn to death in the car, that means that he's in captivity of horrible terrorists that are doing God knows what to him over the past 9 months. But that's the perspective that this mom has, that, you know what? Hopefully he's still alive, and hopefully there's something to be holding on to for another day, and she'll be sharing that perspective with our community.
There's so many lessons underneath all of that. To be able to see something like that, I can't imagine seeing a car riddled with bullets, burned out, knowing that your child was in there, and then offering a prayer of thanks. That is otherworldly. I think that only an extraordinary mother could do.
And I think going back to your point about how modern day heroes just kind of pop up in society, Mrs. Danino on the morning of October 7th or the evening of October 6th was, kind of your regular Israeli housewife, mom of a few adult kids, didn't see herself as any sort of sensational, inspirational, source of whatever for humanity. And she goes through this unspeakable experience. And I believe that these experiences really are crucibles that forge heroes in our midst on a day-to-day basis. And I think she's a tremendous example of that. And I, for one, am eager, I think excited might be the wrong term, but really eager to hear from her in Park City, and I encourage folks to join us.
Yeah, as we get ready to do that, and just before we take our quick break here, give us one thing that, as you have made this connection and seen this event come together, just kind of walk us through the community component to all of that.
For me, the most beautiful thing that I've seen from our community when discussing this event, and there's going to be a beautiful musical component to it. We're bringing out this decade-old recording artist who's been in Utah before, Shulam Lemmer. Our community is looking for an evening of hope and inspiration. It's a non-political event. You won't hear calls for violence. You won't hear calls for the harm of anyone. You'll hear prayers and musical calls for healing, for hope, for the return of the hostages. And I'm proud of our community for being able to maintain that perspective and rise above so much of these violent chants that we're hearing and seeing in the streets. And our community is in a place where we just want healing. We just want peace. We want hope. We want our hostages home. War is something that nobody wants. War is something that we all profoundly hope ends speedily with the return of those hostages, and I'm proud of how our community has put that together.
Oh, I love that. Well, we're going to stay with the conversation with Rabbi Zippel here on Sunday Edition here on KSL 5 TV. When we come back, we're going to dig a little further into that perspective. What is it that actually unites us? How do we overcome some of those uncomfortable things like hate and anger, fear, frustration, and contempt? We'll break that down with Rabbi Zippel coming up next. Stay with us. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. We're staying with the question and the conversation with our good friend Rabbi Avremi Zippel. And just before the break, we were talking about this event that's going to take place up in Park City, a really unique opportunity. And as you said right before the break, we're coming together not for politics, not to position, not to call for this or that, but to come together in unity. Just give us a little framing for that again.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story, Boyd. A couple weeks ago, the Senate hosted a viewing of the unedited footage of October 7th. They flew out someone from the Israeli military. President Adams was very adamant about it. And they showed this footage to about 50, 60 people, lawmakers, policy folks. It was the first time I had seen the footage. It was gut-wrenching. And afterwards, there was a little bit of a media availability. And there was a reporter there that asked me, she said, you saw this footage. It's unspeakable. It's all the adjectives. Do you have any sort of negativity in your heart towards the Muslim community upon watching that footage? And I got to be honest, I was somewhat shaken up from having watched the footage, and I recoiled a little bit at the question, and I remember, what? What I saw on that video were not Muslims, a global community that represents more than 1 billion people, and folks here in Salt Lake City who I'm blessed to have powerful and dynamic relationships with. I saw terrorists in that footage, and terrorists don't represent a huge swath of the global population. And I think that we live in this day and age where it's so easy to pit people against people, faith against faith, community against community, color against color, whatever the case is. And I am grateful that over the past 9 months, as we've been dealing with so much of this, that I've been able to forge relationships with people who have had that same mentality, who have had that same nuance of not turning this into global warfare. This is the Jews and the Muslims, this is the Republicans and the Democrats, whatever the case is. This is people who want to live a free and prosperous and happy life against those who are opposed to those ideals. That's the breakdown. That's what we're dealing with right now. And I think that focusing on how that issue can be viewed and how it really does unite us more than it divides us is something which we really all need to strive towards.
Yeah, that perspective is so vital. There is evil in the world. That's a real thing. We deal with that. And let's talk about some of the contempt that we have seen post-October 7th. We've seen it on college campuses here around the United States. We've seen it other places around the world. How do we move past that kind of anger and hate and contempt for someone, whether it's because they look different or believe different or live different than we do?
Well, I think a great way to start is to get off your phone. I think we live in a society which really kind of preaches that. You know, that there's an act, and then there needs to be the statement, and then there needs to be a counter statement, and on and on and on we go, and everyone just kind of punching and hitting and trying to score points more and more. For me, and I know this is an initiative of the governor here in the state more and more, I've really actually tried to stay out of the noise as much as possible post October 7th, because it's become such a temptation to sink into that abyss of the generalization and the name calling and just the pettiness that our social media discourse has devolved into. And I think we saw that, use college campuses as an example. There's a desire and there's a knee-jerk reaction to how are we going to immediately match fire with fire? We're actually not. We're going to match fire with a huge bucket of freezing cold water, and we're going to attempt to take the temperature down. And we're going to protect our community, and we're going to do things to bring light into this world. And we don't believe in the counter protest, and we don't believe in the matching noise with noise and matching intensity with intensity. And I'm grateful that folks in this town of all stripes and colors, of all sorts of religious beliefs and political backgrounds, have been interested in heeding that call. And there's always going to be noise, I believe. There's always going to be that temptation to drag the discourse down. And I really believe that we have the ability to rise above it. And I'm grateful for those that practice that.
Yeah, it's one of those tale of two cities. You see so much of the one end and kind of the monolithic approach that everyone's the same, that if you're in this camp, you're evil and you're bad and you're horrible. You're not just wrong, you're wrong and evil. But we've got to change that dynamic. And I think this event coming up on the 17th of July, celebrating someone who is currently being held hostage. We have a hard time wrapping our heads around what that really means in this country. But I think getting back to that so that we can then say, all right, where's the humanity, where's the dignity, and where's the divinity in all of this?
And I encourage folks, you had talked earlier about being uncomfortable. I think a lot of folks see an event like this and are like, oh, politics. I want nothing to do with politics. I would push back on that, and I would encourage folks to challenge themselves, to think to themselves, if there's a 25-year-old kid who is at a concert, who's engaged to be married later this year, who has spent 275 days likely underground in some tunnel experiencing God knows what, can I get out there and support the fact that he should be free? And in so doing, I don't take the position of one military power over the other. I don't take the side of one political party over the other. I believe that no human being should be held hostage. I believe that no human being should be in captivity. And I want to get out there and share my support with the loved one, with the family member. This is the first time we're having an immediate family member of a hostage coming to Utah since October 7th. I want to be there to share that with his mom. I want his mom to know that decent people around the world believe that as well. I think it's a test for sure. It's a challenge for a lot of us to get outside our comfort zones, and I look forward to seeing people succeed in that endeavor.
Yeah, give us the details just one more time before we...
July 17th at the Pendry up in Park City. There's going to be remarks from Mrs. Danino, from the mom of Ori Danino, as well as a beautiful musical performance, a tribute to the hostages and to the good of the world from Shulam Lemmer, an incredible recording artist. He's been here in Utah before, had rave reviews. We're excited to bring him back. Tickets are available online, solidarityforisrael.com. It's going to be an event widely attended by folks of every brand here in Utah, from every corner of life, and we're excited to have a strong crowd out there to show our support for Mrs. Danino, and we look forward to spending an enjoyable evening together, bonding over our shared humanity and divinity.
Yeah, love that. Fantastic. Give us one thing in just 30 seconds. What should we do today to change the dynamic?
I think that we should stay off our phone, and I think we should find the opportunity to have a real human conversation with someone who we've never met and learn something about another person in this world that you might not know before, and do your part to make the world a more godly abode. Don't get siloed, touch grass, as the cool kids say these days, and find a human being out there that you can connect with.
Yeah, fantastic. Rabbi Avremi Zippel, thanks for walking with us.
Thank you, Boyd.
As always, important conversation, crucial conversation, and one that we're going to continue. Thanks so much for joining us today. All right, we're going to step aside for a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about that cauldron of contempt. How do we actually get out of it individually and collectively? We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. We began our show talking today about getting comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. We conclude today with something we should never get comfortable with: contempt. Contempt is the belief in the worthlessness of another person because they look different, live different, believe different, or worship different than you do. The cancer of contempt is crushing and killing the soul of our nation. If I have contempt for you, I can say just about anything I want about you or to you, usually behind the false security screen of social media, and still feel good about myself, sleep well at night, and sit in church on Sunday with a clean conscience. Not acceptable. Several years ago, I was preparing for my KSL News radio program when news broke that legendary and controversial talk show host Rush Limbaugh had died at the age of 70 after battling lung cancer. I jumped into the studio with my colleagues Dave Noriega and Debbie Dejanovic to process the news, review Limbaugh's impact on talk radio and American politics in general. I was ready for all of that discussion. What I wasn't ready for and what I didn't realize was how comfortable so many citizens in our country have become with contempt. So as Dave and Debbie and I began the conversation that continued through the end of their show and into the beginning of my program, the text line and many social media pages filled with contemptuous comments about the deceased. Texts ranged from harsh criticism of where Mr. Limbaugh's soul would be banished to good riddance and best news of the year to he was poison, and even to some things that were profane and absolutely sickening. I marveled at how comfortable society has become with contempt, even towards someone who had just died of cancer. I confess it truly saddened me. In my radio comments that day, I spoke honestly of Limbaugh's divisive and hatefully dismissive rhetoric. I also outlined his uncanny ability to listen to and then reflect the feelings and frustrations of many Americans. I covered his personal challenges with addiction. I hit how he was part of what paved the way for contentious political leaders and angry media networks. I discussed his enormous influence, for good and ill, on the national dialogue. I covered his successes and his failures and why in the world 27 million people would regularly tune in to listen to him. So love him or hate him, Mr. Limbaugh was a force that required both supporters and detractors to pay attention. Saying anything positive or anything negative only seemed to unleash more contemptuous responses. I engaged in and tracked the conversation for the next 24 hours. And in the end, I realized that this comfortable contempt wasn't about Mr. Limbaugh at all, or even about politicians or celebrities or business executives or immigrants or millionaires. It was actually about each of us individually. Relationship expert Mary Ellen Goggin noted, contempt isn't a one-time regretful response to another person. It's the expression of a seething, stewing cauldron of scorn, disapproval, and disgust towards that person. Instead of targeting a specific action, it goes for the kill by attacking the person's very sense of self. Contempt grows in negativity and feeds off itself until it spews out in vile and hurtful ways. We're all familiar with the old legend of the frog in the cauldron. As the story goes, you remember if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, it immediately and reflexively leaps out. If instead you put that same frog in a pot filled with comfortably warm water, it'll remain in the pot, even if you gradually increase the temperature over time. The frog will remain in the water until it is everlastingly too late. The frog will have comfortably boiled to death. Many of us are comfortably stewing in our own cauldron of contempt. Things we would never say to someone face to face are easily spewed online, demonizing and dehumanizing those we disagree with through our own manufactured seething scorn and disgust helps us live without the need for a divine discontent of remorse or regret. You see, contempt always keeps us a safe distance from another's humanity and even their divinity, along with our own. Our comfortable cauldron of contempt is of our own making. The stew we swim in is ours and ours alone. No pointing fingers, no placing blame on the words and actions of others. No one. No yes but response about the behavior of those who are the target of our contempt. This cauldron requires us to recreate all the anger and hate and scorn and disgust on a daily basis. In the end, we're comfortably stewed in our own juices. Now, Richard Nixon knew a thing or two about contempt. Richard Nixon's administration was fueled by anger and suspicion, hate and contempt. Yet his parting words to his staff were most instructive. He said, "Always remember, others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them. And then you destroy yourself." For individuals, institutions, and nations, when hate and contempt are the common driving forces, destruction is the ultimate destination for all of us. I firmly believe that we can and must confront our contempt. We should remember that contempt will not conquer contempt. In truth, someone dying, including someone like Mr. Limbaugh, doesn't give them a free pass from accountability for sure. We should not whitewash their past or make them a saint. It would, however, do wonders for all of us, the living, to recognize our own sins of contempt, avoid dancing on the grave of the dead, and cease to spew such angry vile towards anyone, living or dead. Each of us individually and all of us collectively should simply jump out of the sorry soup we are angrily stewing in. If we don't, the nation will boil to death in the comfortable cauldron of the contempt we created for ourselves. Dr. Martin Luther King captured what I think is essential and expedient for America to extricate itself from our cauldron of contempt in his speech, "Love Your Enemy." Dr. King said, "Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." So the only way out of that cauldron of contempt is for each of us to look in the mirror at our own motives and deep into our souls for the kind of love that cures our contempt and empowers us to see the dignity, the humanity, and the divinity in each other. That's the name of the game. Well, that wraps it up for us here on Sunday Edition. I'm Boyd Matheson. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Music and the spoken word is next.